You're standing in your backyard on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, looking at an oak tree you've never once watered, and wondering, maybe for the first time, why it never needed you to. The lawn is green, the tree looks exactly like it did last year and the year before that, and everything feels still in the way that quiet things do when nothing seems to be happening. But that stillness is a lie your eyes are telling you. Right now, beneath every inch of ground you're standing on, there is a network, ancient, intelligent in its own strange way, and completely invisible, that has been feeding that tree, routing nutrients across distances you could never cover with a garden hose, and doing it all without a single person noticing. Not you, not the previous owners, not the crew that poured the foundation of your house. This system predates your property line, your neighborhood, arguably your entire species, and the science of what it actually does will make you look at a patch of ordinary dirt and never quite see it the same way again. This is backyard biology. If something just shifted in the way you're thinking about your backyard, that's the feeling this channel runs on. Hit like if you want more of it. Subscribe if you'd rather keep looking at ordinary things until they stop being ordinary. We have a lot of ground to cover, literally. And leave a comment. What's the strangest thing you've ever found living in your backyard? I'm genuinely curious. I read all of them. Most people think of soil as background, passive, inert, just the place where roots happen to sit. But it's actually one of the most biologically dense environments on Earth, and the organism shaping most of what happens there isn't a worm or a beetle or anything you've ever gone out of your way to look for. It's a fungus. More specifically, mycorrhizal fungi, a group that has been forming partnerships with plant roots for something like 450 million years. Not a recent innovation, not a niche interaction, but a system so old it predates forests as we recognize them. And even now, most people have never really been told what it does, because fungi don't just grow near roots. They merge with them. Their microscopic threads called hyphae wrap around the root structures, and in many species they go further, slipping past the outer barriers and integrating directly with the plant's cells. At that point, it stops making sense to think of them as separate organisms. It's one system, shared across two forms of life, and those threads don't stay contained. They spread, densely, relentlessly, filling the soil in ways that are almost hard to picture. In a single cubic centimeter of healthy soil, researchers have measured up to 100 meters of fungal filaments, not across your yard, but compressed into something smaller than a sugar cube, which means the root system you imagine beneath your tree isn't the full story. It ends where you think it ends. The fungal network doesn't. It keeps going, past the edge of the canopy, past the limits of your lawn, sometimes linking entirely separate trees into the same underground system without any visible sign that the connection exists. And right now, under your feet, that system is active. It's pulling nutrients from places roots alone could never reach, redistributing water, even transmitting chemical signals between plants. But what moves through that network isn't one-sided, and the tree isn't the only one gaining something from the exchange. That part tends to get left out. If you need a way to picture it, the mycorrhizal network functions a bit like an electrical grid, something shared, mostly invisible, easy to forget about until you realize everything depends on it. The difference is that this one has been running continuously for hundreds of millions of years, without oversight, without repair crews, without ever really shutting down. And at the center of it is a very real exchange. The tree produces sugars through photosynthesis, more than it immediately needs. And a portion of that, a surprisingly large portion, is sent down through its roots and into the fungal network. Estimates suggest somewhere between 10 and 30% of the carbon a tree fixes ends up there. Not as waste, not accidentally, but as payment. Because the fungus can do something the tree cannot. Its filaments are thin enough to move into microscopic pockets of soil that roots will never reach. Space is so small, they're effectively invisible at the scale a plant operates on. From there, it extracts nutrients like phosphorus, nitrogen, zinc, copper, and carries them back, delivering them directly into the root system it's fused with. For most plants, this isn't optional. Somewhere between 80 and 90% of plant species rely on this relationship to survive, which includes, quietly, almost everything in your yard. The grass, the shrubs, the trees you've never fertilized and never really worried about. They're not managing on their own. They're participating in a system that's been solving the problem of nutrient distribution since long before humans were around to notice the problem existed. But what makes this network harder to ignore is that it doesn't stop at a single tree and its fungal partner. Because once those connections spread far enough, something else begins to happen. The network links trees to each other. And when one of them starts to struggle, what moves through those connections isn't just water or nutrients, it's information. As you're watching this, it's already happening beneath your feet. If your yard has more than one tree, or even just a tree surrounded by grass, then there is a network in place, active right now, moving resources back and forth through the soil. You didn't install it, you don't maintain it, and yet it's been there long before you arrived. What brought this into focus, scientifically, was a series of experiments in the late 1990s. Forest ecologist Suzanne Simard, working with colleagues at the University of British Columbia, demonstrated that carbon fixed by one tree could be detected inside another. Not through shared roots, not through the air, but through underground fungal connections linking entirely different species. The trees weren't touching, but they were connected. And over time, that picture became more detailed. Larger, older trees, what Simard later described as hub trees, appear to hold a disproportionate number of these connections. In some forests, a single mature tree is linked to dozens of others, forming something less like a collection of individuals and more like a structured network, with certain nodes playing a central role, which makes your backyard a little harder to dismiss as simple. That oak in the corner, if it's been there long enough, may already sit at the center of its own network, one that extends beyond what you can see, potentially linking into neighboring trees, younger plantings, even the grass at its base. Not just coexisting, but participating in the same system. And when you plant something new, it doesn't necessarily start from zero. In many cases, it connects into what's already there, tapping into an established network of fungal threads and resource pathways that were laid down long before it arrived. This isn't speculative. Researchers track these exchanges using isotope-labeled carbon, and they can watch it move from one tree to another, through the soil, across species boundaries. So this is measurable, observable, already happening. But the part that's harder to ignore isn't just that something is moving. It's that, in a very real sense, something is being communicated. What makes this network difficult to ignore isn't just that it moves nutrients, it's that it carries signals. When a tree comes under stress, insects, drought, disease, the response doesn't stay contained. In controlled studies, when Douglas fir trees were damaged by insects, neighboring trees connected through the same mycorrhizal network began adjusting their own chemistry. Not after the damage reached them, but before. Compounds associated with defense started to increase, as if something had already warned them. Nothing visible passed between those trees. No sound, no movement you could point to. Just a transfer through the soil that resulted in a measurable change on the other side. It's not communication in the way we usually define it. There's no intent, no awareness behind it. But functionally, the result is hard to distinguish from information being shared, a signal sent, a response triggered. And once you accept that signals can move, it becomes harder to ignore what else might be traveling along the same pathways. In shaded parts of a forest where young seedlings don't receive enough light to sustain themselves through photosynthesis, researchers have observed net transfers of carbon arriving through these fungal connections. Not enough to make them independent, but enough to keep them alive, sometimes long enough to reach the light, which suggests that survival in these systems isn't always an individual effort. Even growth itself appears to be shaped by the network. Recent studies have found that the specific composition of mycorrhizal fungi surrounding mature trees can predict how well those trees grow, adding measurable accuracy to growth models that previously only considered climate and soil chemistry. So this isn't just a support system. It's an active layer influencing how plants develop over time. And all of it is happening in a space small enough to fit in your hand. In a single cubic centimeter of soil, there can be tens of meters of fungal filaments, quietly transporting resources, adjusting flows, maintaining connections that never stop forming and reforming beneath the surface. We gave it a name eventually, the Wood Wide Web, but naming it doesn't make it any less strange to realize what, exactly, you've been standing on this entire time. At some point, this stops being just about trees, Because you've been standing on this network for years without realizing it was there, walking across it, mowing over it, sitting just above it on quiet evenings, assuming the yard was just a backdrop to everything else you considered important. And the whole time, something underneath has been doing the kind of work we usually think requires intention. Not perfectly, not consciously, but consistently. A young tree makes it through its first dry season because resources move toward it from somewhere else. An older tree continues sending carbon into the soil even after it's been damaged. Species that would never interact above ground end up connected below it, exchanging what they can't produce on their own. None of this happens because anything decided it should. It happens because, over a long enough timeline, systems that distribute resources tend to last, longer than systems that don't. And once you see it that way, the network feels less like a curiosity and more like a pattern. The most connected trees, the ones researchers sometimes call hub trees, aren't just larger. They hold the structure together. When they disappear, the network doesn't vanish, but it fragments. What was once shared becomes isolated, and the smaller, more vulnerable plants are usually the first to feel it, which is a strange thing to realize, standing in a place you've always thought of as controlled, because we tend to see a yard as something we manage, something we shape, maintain, keep in order. But just beneath that surface, there's a system that has been maintaining itself for far longer than any of those ideas have existed, adjusting, redistributing, holding things together in ways that don't announce themselves. You didn't build it. You don't have to think about it. And it's been keeping your trees alive anyway. If you're willing to keep looking a little closer, next week we're going back underground, into another system in your yard that quietly determines which plants make it and which don't, and it has nothing to do with sunlight or water. If this shifted something in how you see the ground beneath you, leaving a like helps more people find their way into it. Subscribe if you're interested in that kind of perspective. There's more here than it seems. And I'm curious, is there a tree in your yard that's always just managed? No attention, no intervention, and still there, year after year? Tell me about it. If you want to explore this further, I've left the research in the description. Original studies, authors, everything worth reading. It'll be there when you feel like going deeper. Let's come back to where this started. A quiet morning, coffee in your hand, a yard that doesn't seem to be doing very much. And just below that, a density of life that's hard to picture. In a space smaller than a sugar cube, meters of fungal threads. Across the yard, a network linking roots that never touch. Most of the plants you can see depending on relationships older than the landscape they're growing in. Carbon moving between species. Signals passing ahead of damage. Young trees receiving just enough to persist. Older ones holding more of the structure together than they appear to. None of it visible. All of it happening anyway. The yard doesn't go still when you stop paying attention to it. The system doesn't pause with the weather or the time of day. It continues, quietly, continuously, because it never learned how to do anything else. And whether you notice it or not, it's still there, just beneath where you're standing.